You're listening to Talking Fatherhood, a CHKD podcast. And now for your hosts, Andrew and Bryson Creighton.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Talking Fatherhood podcast. I am your host, Andrew and I am joined today and always by my co-host, Bryson Creighton. How you doing today, sir?
I am phenomenal. How are you?
I am doing good. How have you been these past few weeks? It's been a while since we've seen each other and gotten to connect. Anything new and exciting?
No, nothing new and exciting. I mean, it's been busy. I'll say that. Obviously coming to the end of the school year, you know this, right? Getting into the mix of trying to navigate what summer looks like for the kids and camps, and summer just becomes. It's funny you asked the question, and as I'm giving this little bit of an update, summer becomes a financial I don't want to say burden, but you really have to plan and think and coordinate, right?
Right.
So that's the big thing right now. Our little guy is doing great. He's 6 months old now, officially, and he had a little stomach bug over the weekend, so that threw a little bit of a wrench in the mix. But other than that, man, things are rolling. How's your world been?
Yeah, it's been busy. I think that's the main thing. It's springtime, so girls are in sports. For some reason, I volunteered to assistant coach both girls, and so some weeks most weeks I'm regretting that decision. But it's nice to be involved, but it just ends up being a lot. And towards the end of the school year, there's a lot of school activities and spirit weeks and dances and what are we doing? ABC countdown. So like every day is like something different that you gotta be aware of. And so, yeah, I'm looking forward to summer. Kind of. It's hard when you work from home because summer means that the kids are home.
Yes.
It's hard to get work done, but at least the school part of it will be over and it kind of be a little bit more laid back. But just like you said, there still summer activities happening as well too, and so yeah, we'll see. It's been busy. I think that's the main word.
The gift and the curse of present fatherhood.
Right, of trying to be there and trying to be involved. Sometimes I'm just like, I don't want to do this anymore, but it's what we signed up for, so can't complain too much. So yeah, just to jump into this episode, we've got a very interesting topic. We're talking about financial anxiety today, which is something that is very common for men and common for fathers as well too. And so today, what we are going to dive into is our personal experiences with financial anxiety, some of the messages that we received as we were growing up, messages that we received from other men, women, and the media about what it means to be a man, what it means to be a provider, and how that plays a role in the type of men and fathers that we are today. So before we jump into that, just wanted to give a quick definition just to ensure that we're all on the same page about what financial anxiety is. And so financial anxiety is the stress or fear that people feel when thinking about money. So whether it's not having enough, worrying about the future, or feeling pressure to provide, it can impact mental health, relationships, and even physical well-being. So even before we started recording, Bryson and I were talking about the difference between just being stressed out from finances, which is, I don't have money or I'm broke and I need money. Sometimes people feel that stress, but when it comes to anxiety, in that definition that I read, one of the key words is fear. So anxiety is really like this overwhelming feeling or fear. And sometimes it's irrational because things could be going well. You could be doing okay financially, but in the back of your head, you still have this nagging sense of, man, I got to get more, or I got to provide more for my family. And so I'm excited to hear what Bryson has to say. You can't see him, but he's smiling and nodding along. And so, once we dive deep into that, really curious about your experience. But I did also want to say that just in terms of like finances and money, we as men have been receiving these messages since childhood, just about the importance of money, the importance of being the breadwinner, and the importance of being a provider. And so as we grow up, we receive these messages that money and status equals success. And so that's how we define our worth is, hey, I've got this money, it allows me to do these things. I've got this status at this company, it allows me to do these things. Other people are able to look at me and see how successful I am. And then also we are taught that money is how we attract women as well too. And so, we're taught that that's the only thing that women care about is money. So let's go get some money so we can get all these women. And so those are the messages that we uh, receive. And then also an interesting part of it too is men are sort of socialized to be competitive. And so it's one of those things where I know it's hasn't really left me, but in terms of like, okay, how much money am I bringing in? How much money is Bryson bringing in? How much money is this friend, bringing in? Am I making more money than this person? Where it doesn't matter, but we've been raised to think that it
Right.
matters and been raised to sort of compete with each other. And so that's what we will be talking about today. Bryson and I trying to keep it at 45 minutes. We'll see how that does because I know I've been talking for like 15 already. So let's go ahead and dive into it. So, I kind of want to open it up to you, Bryson. Want to take a step back. Let's go
Mhm.
dive into your childhood and talk about what messages you received specifically about manhood when it comes to money, having money, and being a provider and breadwinner for your family.
Appreciate the framing there because I think it's very important to separate the standard stress of finances, which I think is a real thing, especially in our current economic landscape. And so the anxiety side of the house, in conjunction with the definition you provided, I like to look at it as, to some degree, not always, but to some degree, it almost feels self-inflicted, right? It's what's sitting in our mind, it's our experiences. And like you said, like thinking back to my childhood, to be honest with you, I would make the argument that I'm probably the oddball in this scenario. There were not, as I can recall, I'll say there were not very many instances where I had the perception of the man in the house having to be the sole breadwinner. Uh, to give some color around that, I had the opportunity growing up to see both of my parents as stay-at-home parents at different times. My father was laid off from, I believe, the FDIC at one point, and he was stay-at-home dad. My mom, when I was fairly young, kind of ran an in-home daycare, and then in high school, she was laid off and decided to retire. And so, so I had the opportunity to see both of my parents almost have this role reversal before role reversal in the household was a thing.
Right.
And when we talk finances specifically, Andrew, I might have shared this with you kind of in the past, but I would make the argument my parents did a fairly great job of, I don't want to say hiding, but shielding me and my sister from the financial challenges that may have existed.
Right.
We didn't grow up in an environment where we wanted for something. So our parents were very strategic about that. We were not by any means well off. You could make the argument that we were borderline middle class. But when I say borderline, I really mean borderline.
Right.
I would say my parents were very smart with their money, and they put it where it needed to be. So that was my childhood experience. I didn't have anything that gave the inkling that I had to grow up a certain way. Now, not to go too far in the future from that, but I would make the argument that my own competitiveness and some of those components started to shape where I wouldn't say where I am today, but where
Right.
I was in my trajectory there. So
Right.
what about you? What about your childhood? What type of inferences did you run into that maybe led to, this methodology of the man of the house having to be the breadwinner and this financial fight?
Right. Yeah. I think that, to your point and what you said, I don't, and that's the interesting thing about like being socialized is like you're getting these messages without like knowing you're getting these messages. And when
Yes.
you brought up your dad being laid off and staying at home, I was like, oh, we should have him on the podcast and ask him, what did that feel like no longer being the breadwinner? And he probably did a good job hiding his true
Yes.
feelings and emotions, from you. So on the surface, like, yeah, everything's fine. I don't mind my wife being the one bringing in the money, but was he really impacted by that? And so I would say we didn't grow up with much money. And so a lot of it was in terms of the messages I received, it was we can't afford that. That
Right.
was always the message. And so in terms of masculinity, I don't think it really came from my dad because, when you're an immigrant in this country, it's like both parents are working hard to survive in this country. And so that's what I saw as well too, where both parents really working hard. And so for me, I didn't specifically see it as like, okay, this is what a man is supposed to do. I didn't get that message from my parents. Now, from other places, I did receive that message. I mean, if you look at, watching TV shows or watching movies and how men are depicted as, especially, growing up in the 80s and 90s, where the main depiction was the man going off to work.
Right.
Take a look at all those sitcoms and the wife staying at home, having dinner ready. And so it has those gender roles. And so you get those messages that, oh, that's what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to go earn money for my family. And then the music I listened to growing up, and, I think you and I listened to the same type of music with,
Yes.
is hip hop music, which if you take a look at that genre, money is everything.
It's the
That's
focus.
that's the focus. That's all that's talked about. And so that really, promotes that message of, hey, you're a man, you're supposed to go get this money legally or illegally. But it's all about getting money. And that's how you get the status. That's how you get women. I mean, that's how you do better than other people. So even if you take a look at like these rap battles or these conflict that happens in hip hop music, a lot of it is I got more money than you. And
Yes.
it's like, okay, you win, you know? And
Yes.
so money, that's where I got those messages, that, okay, as a man and as a father, I need to be a provider and everything revolves around money. And so I think like you and I kind of agree where we may not have really seen these messages from our fathers, but I bet we did, but it's hard as a kid to know like,
Yes.
oh, my dad's sending me a message right now about what it means to be a man, unless it's like explicit. Sometimes they might sit down and talk to you about that. But a
Right.
lot of times, there's messages that we receive that we just may not have noticed. But I know that I've been influenced in that way. I do want to sort of dive deeper into, as you said, you may not have grown up that way, but your competitive nature and competitive streak. And if you guys want to hear more about Bryson's competitive nature, we do have a podcast episode about that. But how did that contribute to your sense of financial anxiety that you may have experienced as you continue to get older and become an adult and a husband and a father?
Yeah. The this happened, this transition, as I think of it now, probably happened towards the latter part of high school. My senior year, I think I talked about this in that episode that we talked about sports and our reflection on competitiveness, which I'm still very, very competitive today, as you know, Andrew.
Right,
Uh,
right.
but I was, I won't say I was on top of the world, but I sure did feel like I was on top of the world as a basketball player, fairly highly ranked from a state perspective and things of the like. Going into my senior season, I suffered an injury that forced me to give up scholarships and sit out my senior year. And I think that transitioned something in my mind because I didn't have that true knack of competitiveness to dive into from a sports perspective. Now,
Right.
thankfully, I would like to say I was a fairly good student, and took care of things academically. So I was able to move into a prestigious university, based on academic honors and things of the like. And I had to figure out how to, put together a livelihood. I didn't want to continue to live at home.
Right.
And so I went and got a job. Now, this is where the challenge, and I'll share this as we get through the episode, and I'll share with you guys my reflection and thought around this, what this anxiety looks like for me, because I think it's different from what many experience. But I went into sales. I didn't have the traditional, out of high school type of job that's like, service level restaurants, or even to some degree standard retail. I worked in a retail environment, but I was on the sales end. And so I started to see the opportunity for what making money looked like.
Right.
Coming out of high school, 18-year-old, making, anywhere between, at the time, $50,000 and $70,000 in a sales position. Granted, the base was like $14 an hour, but from a sales perspective, I was able to see what that opportunity looked like.
Right.
And so that painted a very different picture from what maybe even my close counterparts were experiencing. So that's what started, was probably the little seed that started to grow into, this financial anxiety perspective. It was more so the outlook of, oh, I see what the opportunity is out there in the world.
Right.
And so anything less than that became a challenge, right? So that's the onset. I don't want to go further from that because I want to hear what maybe your onset, or how you kind of came out of childhood and started to formulate who you might be, who you are today, or even if there's an interim there. But that's the seed that I can really put my finger on, and there's some more color to that I'll share throughout the conversation.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it sounds like for you, just the combination of your competitiveness, which has roots in masculinity and
Yes.
expectations as well too, and playing sports and doing all of that contributed to your view of money and like status as well too,
Yes.
and you assumed a position to where it was competitive,
Right.
right? Like where I can do something to impact how much money I make, and
Yes.
therefore I will be the best at this.
And that's the thing, right? In the
Right.
sales environment, it is competitive.
Right.
You're either number one or you're the first loser. And that's the, I mean, that's, me, that's the mentality I typically ride behind.
Right. Yeah. And being the first loser brings on anxiety because it's like,
Yes.
why wasn't I number one? Right. And because your worth is tied to number one. And unlike me, who's comfortable being the first, second, third loser, you're trying to be the best and beat everybody else. Yeah, that makes sense. I think for me, just like I said, I've never really been the competitive type, but I just being raised and like I said, the messages that I've gotten about how important money is and status is and how people view you. A lot of times we make these decisions based off of how other people look at us. And so like when I got out of college and got my first job, I don't want to say how much because I thought I was doing big numbers with that first job, which I really wasn't, but my first big purchase was a sports car, right? And so like I had no business going and buying this sports car with money that I didn't have. And, taking a look back at it now, I know exactly why I got it. It was for other people to be able to look at me and to see my status, even though that was my whole paycheck, the monthly paychecks for that car. But it was a way for me to present like, hey, I've made it, to be able to drive this car back home and for my friends from high school and, that I grew up with to see it, for these women that I was interested in to see me in this sports car. And really, it's just one of those things where it was purely for show, right? And so I think that that's not uncommon, is that as men we feel like we have to make these decisions or do things to present that, hey, we're all good, especially with the rise of social media as well too, where you can present as anything. And so behind that, I was like living paycheck to paycheck. I didn't have any money in savings. And while for me, it wasn't necessarily a point of anxiety, just because I kind of didn't know better, like, oh, I should be saving my money, if I ever want to buy a house or if I ever want to do this or if I want to live a certain type of lifestyle. But for me, it was just get this money and then spend this money
Right.
and like put off this appearance of doing so. But then as we continue to get older and I saw like my friends advancing in their fields and I saw them on social media, like I did have those feelings of, man, my friends are doing better than me.
Mm.
How come I'm not making this much money? Or, this person was able to afford this trip or get this car or do these things. And so it wasn't overwhelming in the sense of anxiety. It was just more of a jealousy type of trait. And a story I tell a lot is that LeBron and I are the same age, right? And we graduated high school the same year. And I've always been jealous of LeBron James because I'm like, man, look what he did with his life. And
Yeah.
look at me. But that's, I know that's a stretch, but that's kind of what my mindset had been. And like
Yes.
just comparing myself to other men, right? Like, am I doing what I need to be doing to sort of show my worth and prove my worth? And then as you get married, that changes as well
Yeah.
too. And then as you have children, because it becomes, am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing as a man? Then you get married and am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing as a husband? Right? Like, am I providing for my wife? Am I in charge of the finances, making sure that we aren't struggling? And when we do struggling, or where we do struggle, am I taking on that burden and
Right.
not bringing my partner into it? And then becoming a father now, where you're competing to keep up with the Joneses, right? It's like, okay, well, so and so bought this for their kid, let me go ahead and, do we have enough money to buy this? Right. And so, an example I'll share is my oldest daughter playing soccer, and she's playing competitively. And so, as a competitive player, they have game jerseys, but they also have practice jerseys as well. And because her team was formed late, the person who's in charge said, "Well, you don't have to get practice jerseys. You can just buy a gray T-shirt." And so I was like, "Cool," because practice jerseys were like $30. And
Yeah.
so I went to Walmart, gave her a gray T-shirt, showed up first day of practice. Everyone else has.
I was gonna say everybody's got practice jerseys.
Everybody else has practice jerseys on. And so as a dad, you're hit with the, okay, let me teach her that it doesn't matter what
Yes.
everyone else is wearing. It's okay to be different, right? Like, you want to instill that in them, but then you also want your child to have what everyone else is having and to have these
Yes.
opportunities. And so, thankfully for us, it wasn't a financial burden,
Right.
but when we try to save money when we can. And so we were just torn, and I ended up giving in and saying, okay, let me just buy this jersey. But there's that pressure in fatherhood as well too, to where you have to make these financial decisions. And I'll admit, part of it too was, if I don't buy this jersey, what are other parents going to think about me or about
Yes.
us? Like, oh man, they must be struggling.
Yes.
They can't afford this jersey, And so I know that I'm still influenced by the opinions of others and what they think of me as a man and my ability to afford certain things, what they think of me as a father, and like the type of lifestyle I'm able to provide for my wife and for my children. So I know that's what I sort of go through currently. So I don't know if that's the same for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very real, right? So I alluded to this a little earlier. My preview or my perspective on this anxiety component is probably, to be honest with you, and I'm glad you shared what you shared, because it's probably the opposite end of the spectrum than what you shared. And what I mean by that is my anxiety around the financial side of things really lands on the success side of things, because I was the one in my friend circle and things of the like that was on the trajectory of continued success and growth, career path, money,
Right.
all the things of the like. And so my anxiety came from the opposite preview, in the sense of I'm losing friends because of my success. And that created anxiety, right?
Right.
It's like I'm losing relationships because I'm doing what I've deemed is best for me, and my relationship, me and my now wife, girlfriend at the time, this is what serves us. And that gave me negative anxiety towards the financial, let's say, gain, if you will. And that started, at a fairly young age. You know what? I mean, when we when we purchased our home, our first home, I think we were what, 23, 24. And, at that time, right? That's the age that, people are graduating college and things of the like. And that created some significant anxiety, because it was hard to make connections with people. And so my friendship group and the anxiety piece went from being who I grew up with, from a grand scheme of things, to the people I was surrounded by, which ended up being older individuals. And so that created just some disconnect.
Yeah. Was it like, did you experience jealousy? Was that the feeling like friends being jealous, and so that sort of made you guys drift apart, or was it solely just because financially you were in a different bracket, and so just in terms of like your experiences and your lifestyle didn't match up with your
I think
friends?
it was twofold,
Okay.
right? It was twofold. In some instances it was jealousy factor, and that came off very straightforward in some instances. Like for instance, I remember one experience with an individual where, you know, we invited them to our home just for a party, and they resented that invite as if we were showboating. And it's like, I'm just inviting you into my home, like,
Right.
you know. But alternatively, to your point around disconnect, and it created, even in very good friendships, like very tight knit friendships, it created conversational disconnect, right? Like the way we looked at life, the
Right.
challenges we were experiencing created anxiety for me, because and that existed with family members too, right? Where it's like, well, I'd like to talk about these things, but they're not experiencing that same thing, right? And so like those levels of life experience started to create anxiety. And to your point, like I've also had the adverse, if you will, or the reverse effect, because I have been laid off,
Right.
right? I've been laid off now twice in my career, and looking back at that created significant anxiety in the sense of, oh, this is like, yeah, layoff is a layoff, but also, you know, in my mind, it's like, I just got fired, right? Like, yeah, it's a layoff. You didn't get fired because you did something wrong or whatever may have you. The company decided to make a decision, but at the end of the day, you no longer have that job, right?
Right.
And it was not by your choice. And so you got fired. And so that's the piece that dug into me psychologically and created some financial anxiety, to where, you know, I had to make financial decisions, and some of them hard, some of them probably drastic. And so,
Was that, sorry, I
no,
just
you're
keep
okay.
want to dive deeper.
Yeah.
But being laid off, what was that? Because earlier we talked about that. It's what your dad experienced,
Yes.
right? And I said, let's have him on the podcast, but we got you
Yeah.
who's experienced that a couple times. So was that something where there was shame? And to your point, like it was nothing you did, right? But like telling other friends. So you're this competitive person
Yes.
who in your friend group, you've won,
Yeah.
right? In your friend group, you're doing the best out of everybody, right?
Yeah.
And then to get laid off, was that something that you were like, okay, let me not tell folks, or like, let me be like, hey, I'm just looking for another career
Yeah.
opportunity because, this doesn't pay enough and I need more. Like, how did you handle that, like emotionally? And then like,
Yes.
what did you present to the outside world?
So, two very different experiences. Let me say that. So the first time I was laid off, this was 2015. And I remember it vividly because it was actually 2 weeks before our wedding.
Oh, that's fun.
And so perfect timing, right?
Yeah.
But that instance was welcomed. And
Okay.
so although it created some financial challenge, I was in the job search mode. I was looking at making my next move. And so that happened to be a voluntary layoff. I rose my hand and said, yeah, I'll leave. And so that was more of a collective decision between the company and myself. But in my eyes, like that scenario just didn't work. It wasn't
Right.
working for me. And I don't think it was working for the company either, because, you know, I think when you're an employee and you're unhappy, that doesn't benefit the company you work for. So So that instance was very different. Now, I didn't have the financial backing that was necessary for that to feel like a good move, right? So for me, selfishly, as an individual, not liking the environment I was in, raising my hand saying, hey, you guys want to make cuts? I'll be one on the list. Let's do this.
Right.
Although it felt good and was welcomed, the financial anxiety wasn't different. It was still a negative experience financially because we had to figure out, hey, what were we going to do, regardless of the fact that I was already in the job search. Now, everything panned out. 2 weeks after our wedding, I started a new position, and everything was fine. The second time I was laid off, this is just a few years back now. What was this? What is it? It's 2025. So this is 2023, September 2023. I was laid off, not in a mutual agreement type of scenario.
Right.
Regardless of what it was due to, it was a very different experience. And that's because the details of my separation, the role that I held and things of the like, gave me opportunity for being okay with the situation. So from a financial perspective, I did not have anxiety by any stretch of the imagination.
Right.
But to your point, from an emotional perspective, that hit me hard. So that first instance, I had no problem. I wouldn't say I was open about it, as I wasn't open about it in the sense of like to the world per
Right.
se. Close friends, yes, we talked about it, things of the like, but I wasn't open about it per se, and mainly because I was already on the move. This last instance, I was very open about it for a couple of reasons. One, because the trajectory that I had gone through, I'd spent 8-9 years with the same company, moved into an executive role, all the things of the like, and then, bam, done. And so I felt like, for two reasons, and this just came with life growth, right? Obviously, we're having this conversation because this is the cloth we're both cut from, in the sense of, hey, let's share life experiences, let's help people grow.
Right.
So there was that side of it, like, hey, no matter how far you get, no matter how much success you have, the tree can get chopped down, or the tree can get some limbs chopped off that inflict some pain.
Right.
It's possible. And the other side of it was, because of the role that I held, I felt as though I owed it to the I'll say the world, because it's literally a global company that I work for, that I needed to share that, and also give thanks to that network and environment, because they helped me grow into who I was and really who I am today. So that anxiety factor was twofold. Now, fast forward to right now, I think, to your point, as it hits the kids, and as we look at how the kids grow and develop and think through money and all the things alike, I would make the argument we've been very forthright, very upfront, very open to some degree about finances and money, and the impact of the layoff that I went through a few years back, especially with, my wife not had been working at the time.
Right.
So yeah, so, that's maybe a long-winded way of answering your question, but it very much was a little bit of a weave in two very different experiences that created anxiety in different elements surrounding the financial situation.
How did it impact your self-worth? And I know it was a little bit different because you were okay financially, but was there that impact on your self-worth of, like, oh man, that job defined me, sort of thing? Like, who am I, sort of thing? Like, am I successful?
100%.
how did that impact you?
100%. I had to go through, and what's funny is, I mean, maybe we met shortly after that, or somewhere
I
in
think so, yeah.
between there. Yeah. Um, and so, when we met, I was probably still going through this thought process to some degree, in the sense of I had to do a lot of soul searching to reconnect with myself, because, when you're in the environment that I was in, you're very out there, you're very close to the people, the network of individuals,
Right.
and, you know, having that access to people, having that impact on people, and then that being cut away, like literally that daily effort of helping other people grow a business, and that just being gone, had a significant impact on me, both professionally and individually. The questions of what am I going to do next really did come into the fold.
Right.
The question of, did this happen because of me, of something I did, or something that transpired, or whatever may have you? Was this a reflection on who I am, and how I do what my job was? All of those questions came into the fold. And to be honest with you, it probably took a good 60, 90 days, maybe even 120 days, to really work through that mental component. And that was a very open effort with my wife, and to some degree, obviously our children were a little younger, but our children at the time really kind of served as a good foundation to keep me whole, and to keep my mental space in a positive realm, because I got to reconnect with them. I got to reconnect with myself. I got to reconnect with my wife, because in that 8 years, I spent a lot of time on the road. I traveled quite a bit and things of the like. It wasn't crazy, but I did travel quite a bit. And so being able to reconnect and really come back to my foundation as an individual really helped get me to where I am now, year and a half, almost 2 years later.
Right. Yeah, and I think for you too, with your situation, especially working your way up into, within a company, that layoff might look a little bit different because you
Mhm.
do have like the expertise and the experience to know like, okay, we're gonna be all right. Like I can find another position, or we have money to last us until this. And, just knowing some people who may not be in that situation as well too. And you referenced earlier, I didn't want to touch on it too much, but the current economic
Yeah.
state and things that are going on, there's a lot of stress that's occurring with that, a lot of financial stress as well too. And I think one of the biggest messages that we're trying to get across, which is hard just because we've been socialized as men, is that, how you're doing financially is not necessarily tied to your self-worth, and doesn't really determine who you are as a man, or, who you are as a father. And when you keep those two connected, it's just going to have a huge emotional impact on you, because especially if you got the competitive gene like Bryson, um, you can always get more money. Like, that's the thing. Like, you feel like you've made it to a certain point, but then you're like, I can make more money. Right. And then if that's tied to your self worth, that's going to be extremely impactful as well, too. And then for me, who's someone who's not very competitive, just being able to share my examples with these little things, to where as a dad, it's like, okay, I have to make these financial decisions, or these these things, even thinking about like the spring coming up and us working on our lawns, and like, man, I got to have a better lawn than my neighbor. I'm like, why isn't my grass greening up just yet? To these competitive things that, if they don't end up working out, they end up like defining our self-worth. And as men, we just need to figure out ways to be able to separate that. And as always, Bryson and I are transparent, and we're still working on all of these issues, and how we deal with struggling financially, or that pressure to want to provide for our family. So we know that it's a work in progress. I know we do want to get out of here, but there was a question that I wanted to pose to you, seeing as between the two of us, you brought a son into the world, which is great for our podcast episodes, because now we can talk about raising a boy and what that
Yes.
feels like. And I could talk a good game and be like, this is what I would do if I had a boy, but you're the one that's actually got to do it. But just in terms of like the pressure that men feel about money and about
Yes.
being a provider and about being the sole breadwinner, the main breadwinner for their family, how is raising your son going to be different, or are you going to do anything differently
Mhm.
to sort of minimize those pressures for him?
Yeah. It's a very interesting question, and the short answer is no. I'm not going to do anything differently. And sure, from outside looking in, that may be a short-sighted answer, because the reality is 5, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, we don't know what that looks like.
Right.
But here today, answering the question, I do not envision doing that differently. There's a couple of things that feed that, and I've been very open with my wife about this as well. It's like, hey, look, if if my wife decided to grow her business, and I hope that this happens, she grows her business to the point where I'm no longer the breadwinner, I'm happy.
Amen. Yeah.
I'm
I'm right there
I'm
with you.
happy, right? I'm
Yeah.
happy because because it's not so much I don't want to say that it's a burden or a stressor that lays on my shoulders, but it's more so it's twofold. Not to get into my wife's mental component and things alike, but one, it shows her that she can do it, because I've always been the breadwinner in our relationship. But one, it shows her that she can do it. Two, it shows our children that anybody can do it,
Right.
but sure as hell mom can do it, right? And having two girls and now having a boy, I think that's very, very important. And so when we talk finances and we talk like financial fortitude, we talk financial, the mental components around finances and things alike, like I don't see the message being very different between the three of our kids. We have an 8 and 5-year-old right now, and well, obviously we have the 6-month-old, but those two are very much in the thick of learning and consuming the things of life. And so a part of that is financial. And so we teach our kids how to look at money, how to think about what they want to do later in life from a
Right.
career perspective. And so we are planting those seeds today. I would love for all three of our children not to take the path that my wife and I took, which is the path that many of us take. You go through high school, you get great grades, maybe you don't get great grades. You go to, some type of secondary school potentially, and that gets you the good paying job. And unfortunately, especially in our economic makeup, not just today, but really for the past, let's call it 10, 15 years, that's not the story, right? And that's not the only path. Can it be? Absolutely, but that's not the only path. And so that's the seed that we are planting with our children. It's not so much where the money is coming from. It's that making sure, and also being fair to yourself to say what I have is enough. And not only what you have is enough for where you're at. I don't say that in the sense of don't long for more, right? Because I very much live in the world of, hey, look, I want more financial freedom. I'm not, that may equate to more money. I think that's the first thing that comes to mind. But whether that equates to more money or whether that equates to, hey, look, we have zero, we owe nobody money. Our mortgage is
Right.
paid off, all the things alike. And so whatever money we make is ours. Whatever end of the equation is, or whatever the makeup of the equation is, it doesn't matter. It equals what I like to say is choices, right? Financial freedom, money, lack of expenses, however you want to plug it, that gives you choices in life.
Right.
And you know, the one thing that I'll say to everybody listening here as we walk away and as we close out, the one thing that I've learned and that I stand on, and I talked about me coming back to who I am and myself and things of the like. The one thing that I'll say about that is I land on understanding that you are irreplaceable for those that you love and care about. Everything else, your job, your paycheck, your home, your car, your whatever you love, your card collection, your whatever it is, right? Andrew, you love to buy the sports car, right? Like
Right. Well, I
whatever
did.
it
I
is.
did. Not
Yeah,
anymore, but
yeah,
yeah.
that's not you today, but that was you, right, at a
Yeah,
young
that
age.
was me back in the
But
day. Yeah.
but wherever you are in life, regardless of the dollars you make, regardless of your financial status or whatever may have you, understand that you're irreplaceable for yourself and the people that you love and care for, right? Everything else is replaceable.
Right.
You can always get more money. You can always get another skill. You can always gain more education. You can always buy another home, big, small, indifferent, downsize, upsize, whatever may have you. All of those things are options. But your mental fortitude, your presence, all those things are irreplaceable for yourself and the people around you. That's the thing that I stand on. And so that's what I want to progress to our children.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's well said. And as we wrap up, I think the other thing too is just being aware of how messages are passed down, and they're not always explicit as well too. And we could be the most well-meaning men and fathers and say, I'm not going to raise my kids this way, but in our actions and some of our words and some of our nonverbals, we are sending our kids a message about what's really important and what really matters
Yes.
as well too. And so the message that you are sending to your sons and daughters about the role that money plays and how that is tied to self-worth, you may not think that you're doing it explicitly, but if they are able to see your reaction, or kids love eavesdropping as well too, and they're hearing you talk about, man, this person's got a nice house, we need to do this. Or you as the dad, and your son is watching you, and your son is seeing, okay, dad takes real pride in being the sole breadwinner, or when he's unable to provide, he feels really bad about himself. Kids are watching that, and they're seeing that as well. So just to go back to what we talked about in the beginning, like financial stress is normal, with what's happening in the economy, with people losing jobs, or you may be in a job that may not necessarily be supporting your lifestyle financially, and that's going to bring a lot of stress and burden. I think the important message is, to Bryce's point, like, that's not tied to who you are as a father or who you are as a man. That's a stressful situation that, figure out a way to cope with it, and a way to get through it, and a way to invite your partner in as well too. We didn't really touch on it, but that's something that men tend to do a lot too when we struggle financially. It's like we don't want to bring our partners in, because it's like, oh, it's all on me. It's my responsibility to figure it out, and that's unhealthy. And so I'm bringing my partner in. If we're struggling, I'm like, hey, this is a we
Yes.
problem.
Let's sit down and talk.
Yeah, let's
We've
sit
had those
down.
conversations.
Right. If we want a certain lifestyle, we need to go through this together. I'm not
Right.
taking this off. on my own. And I will say, as I get closer to 40, that looks differently than it
Mhm.
did when I was 20, so
Yeah.
it's easy for us to be on this other side of 35. I forget how old you are, but I think you are
Yeah.
on this side
Yep.
of
Yep.
35, to where you've had these life experiences and you're starting to understand what's really important in
Yes.
life. And like, does it matter if I have this nice car, or do I just want a safe vehicle to take my kids from A to B? Do I care what these people are saying about, my house or my clothes or this or that? Or am I just happy with, who I am? And so that's really the message that we want to send out there to dads and men who might be struggling financially, is just, disconnecting your self-worth with, who you are as a man and as a father. And
Absolutely.
so, yeah, I think we're under an hour. It was that our goal? I think our goal was 45 minutes, but hey, good conversation as always. So with that, we are going to go ahead and sign off. So thank you all for joining us for this episode of the Talking Fatherhood podcast, and we'll catch you next time.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of Talking Fatherhood. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share this episode. We'll catch you next time.